feel like people get sadness and depression confused a lot when they're completely different things.
I agree. I think that sometimes feelings make us feel like we have an experience that's bigger because in that moment the feeling is so big. You know, you could say the same for feeling stressed and nervous and then, you know, feeling like you have huge level of anxiety and maybe it's just that moment. What made you feel that though? Like what were you thinking about that made you feel about that confusion that people have?
Well, I was just thinking, like, because I feel like people misuse mental health terms a lot.
Yeah.
Like, people will be like, oh my God, my room is so clean. I'm so OCD.
Right.
That one pisses me off the most.
Of course, I get it.
As someone with OCD, like, oh, my room is so messy. I'm so OCD. Oh, I didn't eat this morning. I have an eating disorder. Oh, I am, like, a little bit sad today. I must have depression. Like, and it's just like, maybe you do, but like, you shouldn't just like throw these terms around like they don't mean anything, because they do.
Yeah. And the funny thing with like depression and anxiety, those are also not clinical terms because they're not the names of actual clinical diagnosis. It's just a state of being.
Yeah.
But people associate them to being a clinical diagnosis.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the danger? Or do you think there's a danger in people associating their experience in that moment of sadness or whatever it might be to something bigger like depression?
Yeah, I think there's a danger only because you can think a problem's more serious than it really is. Because for example, sadness compared to depression. Sadness, I'm feeling kind of sad today. Maybe something happened. Maybe, like, like something at my house broke or something. Or, like, I broke up with a friend.
Yeah.
I'm feeling kind of sad about that. Depression of course, yes, sadness is included in that, but it's a lot more kind of intense, I guess you could say. More
Chronic?
chronic, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I think you're making a really good distinction between a very human experience. So there's a situation and I feel very sad about it. And that means that I'm human and my emotions come up because a situation occurs like a breakup or a death in the family or right, it could be so many different things that create sadness, and that doesn't mean that you're experiencing clinical chronic levels of depression, right? When you're having a more depressive state, for example, there might not even be a trigger. There might not be a situation. It just may be something that you're like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I'm feeling like this every day most of the day, or I'm feeling like this many days and I'm not always sure why I'm feeling this way. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say is the distinction between the two of, hey, I'm just feeling sad because, not just, but I'm feeling sad because this is happening versus I'm feeling this way all the time and I don't know why it's happening maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And, as someone who's gone through many depressive states and has been diagnosed with depression, it's it can be very intense, and the states can last for days on end or weeks. And I know, like, I remember when I had my back surgery in July, I fell into kind of a state of depression. Like, it started because I couldn't do anything, and I was just stuck inside all the time. And then it lasted because I couldn't do anything, and I was stuck inside all the time, and I felt down. Like, it felt like I didn't want to, like, get out of bed even after I was healed. Like, I just wanted to, and, I was sick the other week, and I fell into another depression state. And so sometimes it's not even something that occurs. Sometimes it's just a switch in my brain that's just kind of like, oh, I guess you feel sad now. And my brain can go from very happy, like feeling really motivated, to really sad and not wanting to do anything with my life. And there's different kind of intensities that there can be. Like, sometimes my depressive states are just, I am, like, not feeling the best inside right now, and sometimes my depressive states are like, I can't get out of bed.
So you described two really interesting situations in which you couldn't help, being, let's say, stuck in your house. So you were isolating due to your circumstances because, one, you were sick recently, and when you had your back surgery because you were recovering. But because you were in these prolonged states of having to isolate and not do your typical stuff, you then found yourself in a very low state. So even when you were like no longer sick or you had already recovered from your surgery, it was almost as if your brain got stuck in that other spot where you couldn't help it, and now you could, but you were stuck there.
Yeah.
So how did you get out of that place?
So my brain works in a really weird way. My brain kind of has intense switches. It goes from just being really sad and not being able to get out of bed to all of a sudden being really motivated and cleaning the entire house. And that's happened multiple times. Like when I'm really motivated, I'll do a bunch of tasks and then I'll be like, oh God, this tired me out. And then I'll fall right back to where I was. And I think that happens with a lot of people. I say my brain works in a weird way because it doesn't happen to everyone and it's kind of hard to explain sometimes. But it just has a really weird switch. So how I get out of them is just by my brain switching out of them, just kind of out of my control randomly. It's really weird. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if sometimes outside situations help your brain get out of them. Like maybe you have a good moment with somebody or you do something that makes you feel like you're back to normal and you're like, okay, I am back. Like, okay, I can feel good. I wonder.
Yeah, maybe that's a possibility. But even during like when I couldn't help recovering and nothing good was happening, I just switched. I think that's also something that could happen.
Yeah.
Like something boosts it without even knowing, because a lot of times your brain just kind of does things for you and is like, yeah, okay, you don't need to know about this. I'm just going to kind of boop.
Actually, a lot of what I do is trying to help people understand and know their brain more, because sometimes it feels like our brain is doing things without us knowing, but it's also because we're on autopilot.
Yeah.
And part of starting to create change is getting out of autopilot and saying, like, I often say this. I say, okay, let's be our own detective and figure out what are the clues, like what did happen there, because maybe I can use that information to replicate that change of mood. Like that can be helpful sometimes to gather that information about ourselves. Like, oh yeah, when I did that one thing, I felt better, or when this happened, I felt really low. Like or my brain did this. It's like you are your brain, and sometimes figuring out that connection a little bit helps.
Yeah, I mean, you were just helping me with that yesterday. I was feeling kind of having a lot of anxiety in me, and we spent a little time trying to find the source. And that's another big thing that I think a lot of therapists do, like, and that's a good place to start, is trying to find the source. If you don't already know what caused it, trying to find the source of what caused it. Because if you don't know the source, then how are you going to fix it? Yeah. If I don't know that something happened that triggered this, I can't fix something I don't know.
Yeah. And even if you can't find that trigger, knowing that, like, maybe I need to keep looking, or maybe I need to figure that out. Like, that's knowing, right? Like, there isn't one thing. Like, that's knowledge too.
Maybe there's a few things. Maybe there's maybe there is nothing.
Maybe there's nothing, and that's information to have too, right?
Yeah.
Like, going back to when you were recovering from your back, I would even say that any typical human, not that you're typical or I'm typical, I mean, what does that even mean? But I mean, like, I think most humans that have to experience a long recovery and get stuck in their bed would probably experience some feelings of being down.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, now whether our experiences would match the level of how low or how long, now that's each unique experience. But like, I get that you would struggle in that time, right? You're not
Mm-hmm.
doing all the things you want to do or typically do.
Yeah,
So
I'm not, and it was also during the summer, so I couldn't, even if I
Yeah.
recovered faster, I couldn't go back to school.
Right.
Because I was I was not fully recovered, but
Mostly.
I was able to walk when I went
Yes.
back to school. Um,
Thank goodness.
thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was like I couldn't do my normal activities. I couldn't go out. I couldn't go shopping. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't go to school. It was all like there was nothing I could do. I was stuck inside all day, and that also kind of brought down my motivation. And if I was in school then and I had homework to do or something, my motivation would have been at an all-time low. My grades would have dropped.
If I had told you that story, like that happened to me, let's say, and I was like, "Oh, I'm so depressed," would you say I was depressed, or would you say like, yeah, I get that. That seems like a normal experience under those atypical circumstances of having to be stuck.
Under those atypical circumstances,
Yeah.
I feel like that's totally normal. I feel like it becomes like maybe there's something more when after that it lasts.
It lingers.
It
Absolutely.
lingers, and it lingers for a long time.
And here's so that is very important, because if we're talking clinical depressive diagnoses, the intensity and the frequency of those symptoms are what mark it as a clinical diagnosis. So if that lasts for a certain amount of time, a prolonged period of time, then you can say, okay, well, you've adjusted out of this situation, and but your behavior hasn't adjusted back to where you were. And so, yeah, after some time, then could be that it's important to talk to someone and figure out whether this is now like a new state of being for you. But ideally, and it seems like for you, once you kind of got back into the swing of things, back to doing your normal, eventually, did you get back to feeling more yourself and less depressed state?
Yeah, I did, and that's why I think that the two times, not the two times, the time I had my surgery, was just because I couldn't do anything and I couldn't help it, and my mind just kind of went on autopilot, like you said earlier. And I think that that certain thing happens to everyone. If you're stuck inside, if you become a hermit and you don't know, some people are like always inside and they're able to manage that, but for most people, if you're always inside, the human body is meant to get outside and socialize and do all this
and get some fresh air and
get
sunlight.
some fresh air. Yeah, that's why people who don't do that too often take supplements, because the body is meant to get those naturally. And I think I've had experiences where I could help it. I couldn't help it, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't have like something that was keeping me inside.
Yes, there wasn't.
My mind just, and that's when I realized, like, oh yeah, this is something more.
Yeah, because you're like, I can't put my finger on one event necessarily. It's just happening. And that's where it can be a little more concerning, because when you're doing that investigating, it's not coming up with any like clues for you to say, oh, it's connected to this or connected to that.
Yeah, exactly. And let's dive more into that. Let's dive more into topics about, sorry for all the noise, we're moving the microphones around. Let's dive more into that, because we're talking about like something that is keeping you inside. Let's talk about when it becomes a serious problem. So topics which I just imagine a little graphic up on screen like yeah, so I think to kick this off, last year was one of the hardest years of my life, and for many, these past years, a couple years, have been really hard for a lot of people, like especially with COVID. But last year, even when we were in person, it was still really hard.
Yeah.
And it's still really hard now, but last year was by far the most intense year of my life. I was feeling really down because I was surrounded by someone who would just, they were always like down, and I felt bad for them. But, it kind of brought me down, and then that's when I realized, wait, this is just bringing something out of me. After I talked to some people, and they were like, yeah, you have depression. It's hard to realize, it's hard to admit to sometimes for a lot of people. Like, it's like, you don't want to admit that you have something that's serious, because depression is really serious, and although a lot of people have it, it doesn't make it any less, like, intense. And depression for me has been sometimes not being able to get out of bed, not getting ready in the morning, just kind of coming to school and being really insecure, that because depression can be the source of many other things to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe this is a good time to talk about some of the things that can be present, to look out for, kind of like red flags when maybe you're experiencing these symptoms over a period of time and it's not getting better. Some of that can be irritability, actually, is a big one, which, like, a lot of us are irritable, right? But
Yeah.
when it's frequent, and it goes with having a low frustration tolerance, where things that maybe you could deal with before are now just, you can't, you're so irritated by them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Very little patience for people. That's a typical one for actually adolescents that experience depression. Other things are like, this is a big one, not finding pleasure in the things that you used to enjoy doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that can lead to some isolating, maybe abandoning friendships. I mean, it can look
Mm-hmm.
different for everyone. Abandoning activities, right, that you
Mm-hmm.
used to enjoy. That can be a sign. Combined with, like, low motivation, right? It can go together. So you were talking about school, and so sometimes when someone is experiencing clinical levels of depression, or even maybe not even clinical levels, but it's just maybe going in that direction potentially,
Mm-hmm.
you might see a big switch in their grades. You might see homework is not being done anymore, and now there are a lot of reasons why that can happen. It doesn't necessarily mean depression. It could be someone who really doesn't understand
They're just really struggling in that class.
Yeah, they could be struggling academically and maybe not accessing the academic support they need. So it's not to say that it's always that, but one way can be someone who was, let's say, performing well, all of a sudden is not performing well academically.
Mm-hmm.
Self-esteem you talked about, absolutely, that kind of like really negative self-talk, and it affecting your self-esteem, and maybe it affects your friendships and socializing. Yeah, there are, and that overall feeling of down, feeling low. Those are some things that can start to happen frequently when you're feeling down, and I'm sure you can relate to some of those.
And I'm so glad you mentioned irritability and low motivation, because those are my two biggest symptoms when I am in a depressive state. Low motivation is one of them, and yes, low motivation for school is huge. Like, because school is something. Let's be honest here. I mean, some people enjoy school, and I enjoy I enjoy my teachers. I enjoy the friends that I see. The work is, let's be honest, most people don't enjoy it.
It's work.
It's work.
It's work.
It's not meant to be, yay, I enjoy this so much. But I think that low motivation for that, like just not being able to do it, but also low motivation, I've noticed in me, for things that I used to love to do. Like, I when I'm in a depressive state, I love gaming, but I can't get the motivation to go to my computer. I can't get the motivation I love to entertain people. I can't get the motivation to talk and do all that and have high energy. And irritability, everything pisses me off when I'm in a depressive state. Like, someone talks for 2 seconds longer than my brain wants, I'll start to get really angry. And it's something I can't control. Like, last year, I was always angry because I was always sad. And sadness turns into anger a lot of the time for some people. And like I would be like just it was awful. I'd feel so bad for people that I would just like scream at. Like I feel so bad because it wasn't cool, obviously.
You weren't your best self.
I wasn't my best self. But it was because I couldn't. I just wasn't thinking. My brain was a fog. I wasn't thinking at all. So when someone did the smallest thing to me to piss me off, I was done. I was just, I was at my threshold of anger the entirety of last year. I've learned how to manage that this year, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, I can definitely tell. I think of anger as like the gateway feeling because we're all a lot more comfortable in expressing anger and irritation than we are sadness or worry. Like we tend to want to hide those feelings, where anger somehow feels easier to access and easier to put out there.
Because it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's more acceptable. I mean, as much as we don't like necessarily like people who are angry,
Yeah.
we're more used to seeing people that are angry versus somebody just like breaking down crying or, worried sick that they're shaking, right? We are more concerned about that when we see it. So I think we adopt that, and then when we're feeling feelings, we tend to show the one we're more comfortable with.
Yeah, if I see someone crying in public is really hard for a lot of people. Like if I started breaking down in class, I would feel probably really embarrassed. It's not something you should feel embarrassed about, but it's just you don't see it like often. Like if I saw someone yelling at someone, I'd probably or like being really angry, I'd probably be like, oh God, what's happening with them? Just as my first thought. Because that's human instinct. Someone's screaming at someone, you're like, whoa, what's happening there? If someone's breaking down crying, I'd probably go over and be like, are you okay? But I saw this quote once, like, people only notice your sadness when it turns into anger. And I was like, yeah, that's true, because sadness a lot of people are able to hide it. Anger is really hard to hide because it's so built up. It's like your
volcano.
It's like a volcano that's about to burst.
Erupt.
And the volcano just standing by itself, maybe it's like crumbling a little bit. It can handle that. If it's about to burst, it's about to burst. And there's nothing it can do. And I feel like that's the perfect way to describe a human with sadness and anger.
Yeah. Something else we talked a little bit about before we started the podcast that I want to talk about as far as like red flags and things that might change if you're feeling a very low depressive state, and that can be how much you're eating. And some people that are very down in a chronic way may start to eat more, and others may eat less, and also sleep. Some may sleep more and some may sleep less. And so just what it really is that each person's an individual, but what you might see is that your typical habit with sleep or food, that relationship you have with those things may change when you're in a very low state, and it look different,
I agree, yeah. And I think that what I've noticed is I have when I'm in a depressive state, sometimes food is the only thing that's making me happy at the time, so I'll eat a lot. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I'll like think to myself, oh, you're so fat. I mean, look at this person, they're so skinny. You got to eat less to fix yourself. I'm saying that in quotes. Fix yourself. When that's not something that you need to do. Like, maybe, eat healthier or, balance your diet out, but, like, don't, like, just not eat. Don't punish yourself because you don't look like someone,
So you just talked about the biggest part of really any mental health, condition or state of being is our brain and the thoughts that it produces for us. And so when our brain produces unhelpful and negative thoughts, and we start to have a lot of those, then of course it's going to affect your mood, because your thought affects your feelings, and your feelings affect your behavior. And all those three
It's
things
all a cycle.
Yeah, it's a cycle. It's connected. It's a triangle. And so if you can't, if your thoughts are just in that dark negative place, it's pretty hard to feel different.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So one of the things, kind of making sure that we hit on the, like, what can you do? What do you do when you're feeling that way? I usually say there are two places that are good to start. Once you've done some of that detective work that we talked about earlier, about like how maybe like finding the triggers and all that, it's making sure that you are aware of the kind of thoughts that you're having, and trying to change those thoughts, which can be hard because you may not believe the thoughts that you try to change them to. And so it can be a little easier sometimes, not easy, but maybe slightly easier than changing your thought, is trying to change your behavior.
Yeah.
So if I'm feeling really crappy about myself and how I look, and then I've been eating a lot because I was feeling down, kind of taking what you were saying, and maybe I haven't been eating the healthiest food, I may not be able to change my thought to say like, oh, I'm fabulous and I love how I look and I love, I mean, it's great if we can feel that way, but I'm trying to be honest and saying it's hard for us to sometimes talk to ourselves in kind ways, especially if we already think negatively about ourselves. So it might be easier to start changing your behavior a little bit. Like, you know what, today I'm going to take a walk, and maybe I'm going to dress differently in a way that makes me feel good about myself, or I'm going to eat a meal that I feel good about so I don't feel so crappy after I eat something that I know is unhealthy, right? So changing that behavior to try to change that thought.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, but I also do want to mention that if that's hard for you too, that's normal too, and that's okay.
Yeah.
When you're in a depressive state, a lot of things can seem hard. And what I also noticed is, we're going to get a little bit like deeper here. I'll put a trigger warning at the beginning of the podcast, but sometimes when you're just in such a deep state, for some people, they try to take control of what they can, and sometimes that's eating, sometimes that's harming themselves, sometimes they just crave control because they can't feel anything, and it can make them feel numb, so they try to feel something, and that can be, doing something to your body, like cutting or doing drugs. Some people try to escape with drugs, and of course most drugs are illegal and really bad for you, but
it still happens.
It's they need to escape from reality.
Unfortunately.
And drinking.
Anything that's
absurd, like not drinking like a little bit is okay, like drinking, bottle after bottle every day. And
so risky behavior, substance use, self-harm, absolutely, all of those things can be ways that people start to try to feel like they can take control, or try to feel better, perhaps, right, by changing altering their minds through substance use,
or just the thrill of it in the moment, like they want to feel alive and thrill, and eventually sometimes they get pushed over the limit, and that can lead to suicide or something like that.
Well, and the rough part about substance use, which I know is not the topic, but in that moment you may feel better. Unfortunately, what happens in the brain is that afterwards, when that substance is no longer in your body, your brain tends to feel like way worse than it did when it first started. So it can be a really downward slope.
And you go back to it to feel that again.
It's a vicious cycle.
It's really bad.
And I know you said you're going to put a trigger warning. Maybe we can also have like the suicide hotline up or something like that on the screen.
Yes,
because it would be remiss of us not to mention the fact that sometimes when people are so down and depressed and hopeless, they may start having suicidal thoughts. They may even attempt suicide, and so
which is sadly getting more and more common nowadays.
And the worry is that what is that saying? It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah.
And that's because in that moment you feel very, very hopeless. It doesn't mean that you will feel that way forever, but trying to address it through suicide doesn't give you that chance to get better. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And so it's important to say, obviously, there's a suicide hotline. There's resources right here in school, coming to see me, talking to a trusted adult, getting regular therapy, doing something about it, because I will say, and I say this a lot to students that talk to me about having suicidal thoughts, is that thinking something and doing something are two different things. But if you're having these thoughts, it is important to talk to someone so that it doesn't turn into action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important to, and you obviously don't want to trauma dump on other students because that can make them feel down, but that's what therapists are there for. They're there for people. You're there for people to trauma dump on you because you're trained to deal with that.
Yeah, it's not even dumping for me, it's just me giving you a space, trying to be present for you so that you can open up about that, and it is important to share that. And I tell this to people when they come see me, that there are times where I have to talk to someone outside of the room legally, yeah, because if someone's life is in danger and I can't guarantee their safety when they walk out of the room, I can't in good conscience let them walk away and say, well, I hope that works out for you, but that doesn't mean that every single time I talk to someone about their thoughts, I have to share that with someone, because sometimes, like I said, thinking is not doing. But when I can't be sure about that safety, that's when I do that. But I let people know that's one of those areas of confidentiality that can be gray.
And I'm glad that you let people know, because when you don't let people know, then they just get scared and feel unsafe.
They feel betrayed, right? Like, you didn't tell me that. And so it's important that people know that those...
Or when you lie to their face, like...
Yeah, and I would never, and that's why I tell the students, remember when we first met and I told you that's like, there's one of the 3 things that I have to share. I remind them that I let them know that, because I never want to feel like they can't trust me. So I try to be very transparent about what those 3 things are, so that they know when I have to go outside. And I never do it behind anyone's back. I'm like, let's do it together. Let's,
if you'd like, we can go talk to someone together. We can go address this together, because your whole point is making someone feel safe, not just like, because scaring them to death also isn't good. Absolutely.
And here's the other thing, is when you're in that state, you feel so alone and so hopeless. And talking to me about it is a start, and sometimes letting the people in your life know where you're at, so that they can remember to remind you that you're not alone, that you have people in your life, hopefully, and if you don't feel like you have people in your life, like, that's step 1, is getting your support system in place.
Getting people in your life. And that sounds like, but doesn't everyone, to outsiders, that sounds like, but doesn't everyone have people in their life? Like, no, sometimes people don't have, like, trusted people in their life. I mean, most people have, like, a parent or something, but, sometimes those parents aren't the most trustable. And sometimes, or maybe you're surrounded by bad friends, or sometimes you maybe don't have friends at all. You gotta find people who will accept you for you and understand, and, just be able to be there for you. And, just having people around you can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and, sometimes the caregivers you have around you, or the friends you have around you, they may just need to understand where you're at to be more present for you, or be more helpful for you. So I sometimes think, like, getting the people in your life to know where you're at can be helpful. I'm not saying 100% of the time, but sometimes just letting them be more aware about where you're at can help them be a better support.
Yeah, exactly. And support is so important, because, like, one of the things that is most said in times of mental health and need is, don't struggle alone. Get, like, someone to be there for you, and that's really hard. It's really hard to address your problems, and I know that, and you know that, and anyone who, like, say you mess up somewhere, like, it's hard to go up to someone and say, hey, I messed up. Same feeling of when you're dealing with something, it's really hard to go up to someone and say, hey, I need help. Yeah. But that is always the first step. So.
Well, and that's also part of what I try to do. You know, when those moments happen where I feel like, okay, I can't guarantee your safety. Those are times where I'm like, let's see what part of your support system we can put in place, and I will help you. I will help you let them know where you're at, because it is hard to say it on your own sometimes. You know.
Yeah.
To turn this a slightly more uplifting direction, yeah. Maybe we can talk about some of the things that we can do. We've already talked about a couple of things, right? Like we talked about trying to change your thoughts or trying to change your behavior. Taking it slowly. Be kind to yourself. You mentioned going outside and getting some fresh air, interacting with people when you can muster that energy, talking to someone.
And it's another thing to do, like when we mentioned taking it slowly, this can be really helpful for a lot of people. I know this was helpful for me sometimes. If you feel like that day you can't, say, brush your teeth in the morning, maybe you just try to, like, use mouthwash or something. Yeah. Or if you can't, like, you know, what's another example? If you can't shower that day, maybe just try to, like, rinse off, or maybe just, and if you can't do that, there's always a tomorrow. There's always another chance to do it. But, you know, like, if you have to take it really, really, really slow to get better, that's okay, because you're still trying to help yourself.
Baby steps, right? Baby steps. I have a question connected to that, a little random, but I'm just curious. Let's say that you're not taking very good care of yourself, and your friends notice, like, hey, he's maybe not bathing or changing his clothes, or, you know, like, there's some indicators. What do you think is the best approach as a friend of someone who may be experiencing that? Like, do you say something? How do you say that in a way that doesn't make them feel bad? Or do you say nothing at all? What do you think? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. I don't think there's one answer.
As someone who sees someone else struggling, like, you can tell they're struggling, I'd say just, you don't have to, like, force an answer out of them, but, like, just say maybe, hey, if you ever need anything, I'm always here for you. If you need help, like, you can always talk to me, you can always come to me, because if you really care about that person, you'd want to help them through something. So, yeah, just let them know that you're there for them, I think, is the best that you can do, because you obviously can't. If they don't want your help, you can't really do much. But, you know, yeah, just let them know that you're there for them.
Do you let them know that you've noticed? Like, I've noticed that you're not taking care of yourself like you used to, or you're not talking to us as much as you used to, and I just want you to know that I notice, and I'm here for you, I care about you, and if there's anything I can do. Like, do you lead with kind of your evidence that I'm paying attention and I see you? No?
I think yes, because whenever someone, like, one time someone, I believe, messaged me and said, hey, you seem a bit off, are you okay? Just know that I care about you, I'm always here for you. And that made me feel so good inside, because I knew that someone cared. Like I almost started tearing up. Yeah. I was like, wow, someone cares enough about me to, you know, like, message me and notice. So I think, yeah, in my opinion.
So here's, I think, a big, like, don't do it this way. I think, tell me what you think. Where someone's like, are you okay? You know what I'm talking about, right?
You good, man?
where that might, it's like all about tone, right? It's about all the words that you choose. Like,
You good? That's more like if someone's like having a seizure. You good? No.
Well, hopefully call 911 if
Okay,
someone's
well,
having a seizure.
you know what I mean.
Yes. So,
Are you okay?
are you okay? Because sometimes I think that might just shut down that conversation right there, or somebody might not feel supported. So being careful about word choice and tone, and
Tone is so important.
Tone is so important.
And I feel like people don't. Sorry for not letting
go
you
ahead.
speak. I feel like people don't notice that enough. Is how important tone is. Like that's why I think online people call this chronically online, but I think that term. Well, I think we should do a whole nother episode on that because that term pisses me off. People who say that you're chronically online, they're the chronically online ones.
Tell me what that means.
Chronically online. This topic really gets me going. Chronically online to some people means like, identifying with what you want to identify and, LGBTQ and like mental disorders. That's chronically online to some people. If you, by the way, anyone listening to this, if you say people are chronically online, you're the chronically online one. I'm sorry, I'm calling you out here and now.
Well, it sounds like it's not very helpful to say that to somebody.
It's not.
It's a put down. It's dismissive.
But that's just because people online, and I'm sure I've heard, I think I've heard it here at school sometimes. It's like, shut up. No one cares, man. I'd be more harsh if we weren't on a school podcast, but no one cares. Come on.
Wait, so you're saying that if you notice somebody's feeling down and not themselves, don't be like, "Are you chronically online?" Or
Yeah,
how do you use this?
That's so rude.
That's rude. That's not nice.
That's not nice. You're being mean to them.
You're putting them down rather than offering
that's their
support.
point. People who use chronically online, that's their point to say. And it's like, shut up. If you're going to call someone chronically online, keep that to yourself. Like, you're also online telling everyone that they should kill themselves and that they're chronically online. Who's really the bad one here, Someone who wants to identify as themselves or someone who's bringing other people down? Who's the bad one?
So that's not someone offering help. Someone who offers help would use the right tone and actually express caring and say, I'm noticing a difference and I'm here for you and I care about you.
Yeah.
Let me know if you want to talk, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's the right way to approach it. And sorry, I went on a rant there. Tone tags are something like people use like /J, which means joking. So someone says like, I hate you /J.
JK.
Like /J, like they don't mean it like I hate you, like so they mean it like it's usually used in text. Because if someone texts you, I hate you, in text, that can either be I hate you or I hate you, oh my god.
Yeah, you can't read the tone
that.
there.
So that's what tone tags are used for. Or /gen, like, oh, I'm saying this in a general way, or /lighthearted, SRS /serious.
So this is like because young people don't use emojis because it's not cool, so then I do that. So you're teaching me stuff.
No, they use emojis though.
I thought it wasn't cool to use emojis.
Huh? Where'd you hear that? It's a few emojis are cool. I like emojis. I think emojis are cute.
They help me put context in a text.
I think they're cute. But yeah, tone tags are really helpful to like me personally.
Yeah.
And to a lot of people.
Because you can spiral if you get the text message and you can't read it.
If you get the text message, I hate you,
and you're like,
from your friend, and you're like, wait, do they hate me? Or are they saying in like a joking tone? Because in real life, you can be like, I hate you, or like, I hate you, oh my god.
And then you get it.
That's the tone that you can read, but
yes,
in text, it's just text on a screen. You don't know how they're saying it.
And to bring it back to depression.
Oh, right.
No, seriously.
Sorry about that.
No, seriously. If you are already feeling low and down and your brain is being negative and you get texts like that aren't clear, you can really spiral and go.
Because your brain thinks of it automatically as negative. There's no other option. It's automatically negative to your brain.
Yeah. So that's tough. That's why sometimes, doing everything online can be difficult when your brain is in a negative space because you may not get the clarity you need.
Yeah, and the tone may not come across right.
Hopefully they're tone tags. Now I know what that is.
Yes, I can. If y'all need a list of tone tags, just search tone tags card with 2 R's, and it will give you a list of all the tone tags.
Learning a lot of new stuff right now.
It's really helpful. It's really helpful. So, like, I don't even know all the tone tags. So, like, I go on that site if someone uses a tone tag. I don't know. So, yeah. This podcast is getting quite long. It's about 45 minutes already.
Holy smokes. Okay.
So, we had a lot to say about this topic, didn't we?
We did.
Sorry for getting a little angry in there. The chronically online topic really gets me going. But I think it's good to bring all that up. And, you know, obviously I could write an entire novel about what I have to say about depression and all that. So maybe we do a part 2 in the future when we find out more. But yeah.
Well, hopefully, if one thing that comes through is just that everyone's experience is unique, and there are places that we can relate to each other, hopefully, and hopefully something we said today resonated with you if you needed to hear it. And most of all, we just want to make sure that you feel seen and heard, and you know that there are supports in place here at school should you be feeling any sense of depression. My email is nstebbins, STEBBINS, @spusd.net. Feel free to reach out if you think I can be helpful in any way.
And my email, if you have any topics you want us to talk about, or just any topics, or if you want to, any topics, is nolanross13 @stu.spusd.net. And if you are just desperate and you need a suicide hotline, they changed it from that long number to 988. So call 988 if you are feeling helpless and you need someone, or text them.
Thank you.
There's also vent hotlines, and I'll put those at the beginning of the episode. But
awesome.
Yeah, so thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.